This is F.D. Recovery, where we interview addicts and alcoholics.
Our aim is that through this podcast, we might help you on your journey of recovery.
Thank you for listening. Hello, you are listening to F.D. Recovery. I'm your host, Frank, and you're listening to the portion of the podcast that is the weekly intention. What we do is we go week to week, use spiritual principles and or talk about topics, and we dig into them. We give our point of view and talk about it in a recovery sense. So last week was abundance, and this week will be emotions. So I'll do a recap on abundance last week. So I think the big thing that I realized in my recovery while working on abundance is understanding that gratitude is kind of the key holder to the whole abundance feel, right? When we're dealing with gratitude, it puts us in a better state of mind to be more open to the things around us and the things we have plentiful, right? It's super easy to when you're living out of gratitude to kind of look at the things you don't have rather than things you do have. And if you're grateful for the things you take, when you count your blessings, you end up being a little bit more grateful, right? And I find that the correlation between the abundance mindset rather than the scarcity mindset is polar opposites, right? Usually when you're abundant, you're dealing with gratitude. Obviously, gratitude can be interchanged with whatever spiritual principle and or topic or situation in life. Gratitude is a very, very important tool. But when it comes to abundance, I believe they kind of come hand in hand, right? The feeling for abundance for me is almost a wealthy feeling, not in a monetary, but just like in a vibrant spiritual sense, right? You don't have to be rich to be wealthy. That's not the correlation there. Obviously, it is a form of wealth, only in a monetary sense, but there's a lot of people with a lot of money that have bad attitudes and treat people like crap. So, we're talking about wealth in more of a spiritual sense rather than just a monetary value. That is included, don't get me wrong, because, money is an extension of, a certain type of energy. We trade our energy for money. We literally trade our time and our effort. So it is a part of that. So I don't want to act like it's not. But wealth is much more encompassing in a spiritual standpoint rather than just a monetary kind of thing, right? So all I know is with gratitude is such a important factor when you're dealing with trying to harness this abundance game and trying to put yourself in a position to receive the gifts that really are out there for your existence, right? I'll tell you what, when you're living in fear, triggers, and emotional hangups, what happens is you end up blocking out certain paths, and it ends up closing doors rather than opening the ones that would really benefit you in the long run, right? It opens up doors, but not necessarily the ones we enjoy. Obviously, every path can provide a lesson. So, who am I to judge what somebody's going through? There's a higher power plan to it, right? There's a whole God's plan. And people go through trial and tribulation. So if they make bad choices, sometimes people come along and be judgmental and say, well, you shouldn't be living that way. And that is true. It was like that for me for a while, but also, it took what it took to get me where I'm at. So really it wasn't, it was God's plan, right? So sometimes when someone's going through something and we want to intervene and or, put our hand in there and try to control it, it's like sometimes you just got to back up and let God do the work. Because when you try to interject and try to put your whole thing into it, then it can get sometimes messy, but it's also important to know when to step in and also lend a hand. So it's tricky business. You don't want to be, it's a delicate balance, right? So for me, I do a lot of praying and a lot of staying in the pocket to try to help guide me in those situations. I fall short and I fail all the time. That's a part of being human, but being able to dust yourself off and step forward and continue this work that we do, I think is the most important key to this. So, abundant mindset was, towards the end of the week, it was tough, right? But only because we got some bad news and some wonky things happened. But let's switch up to, let's see, let's pull up emotions. Let's see. I think emotions are, um, I think emotions are kind of oversold or undersold, right? Let's see the basic. Let's ask Google what that, emotions are complex reactions that involve psychological, behavioral, and experimental elements. Um, experimental elements. They are physical and mental states triggered by neural physiological changes and are often associated with feelings, thoughts, and behavior responses. Some say emotions are caused by a neurobiological process, but can be activated and influenced by non cognitive, conceptual, appraisal, and perceptual processes. There are no scientific consensus on a definition of emotion. Oh wow, okay, right. Emotions, right? And let's see what it says to recovery. Emotions in recovery. Let's see. I think this is a very key factor so emotions in recovery are a normal but challenging part of healing, often involving emotional roller coaster. I'm familiar with that. I've sent some people on it and then they've done it to me. With it, well, I guess nobody ever really does anything. We're a willing participant, right? Emotional roller coaster with intense feelings like anxiety, fear, guilt, anger, loneliness, and depression. As the brain relearns the process, feeling without substance, imagine that, right? That was the only reason I used it, either to feel something good and or to not feel something bad. Either way, you have to face it all, right? But feeling without substances, requiring developing emotional regulation through skills like mindfulness, journaling, therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that. Um, and support systems to rebuild resilience and negative triggers. Right? We're trying to conquer those negative triggers, right? So let's see. Common emotions in recovery. Negative. Anxiety, depression, anger, fear, guilt, shame, resentment, paranoia. Ooh, that paranoia gets me sometimes still. Well, a lot of them do, but paranoia settles in and causes the most damage in my recovery. Sadness, frustration, loneliness, and boredom, right? And let's see the positive swing on some of these emotions we can feel. Joy, relief, hope, pride, and excitement can also emerge, right? That's what happens. Things pop up. You're going to deal with these negative and positive emotions. I think emotions are really oversold and truly at times undersold. Them being oversold or undersold is like, the society breeds people like, especially us men, right? We got to be stoic and there is some wisdom behind being stoic, and being a non-reactive and trying to take a more balanced approach and a more philosophical, more heady logic approach to it. But the problem with that, and when that gets a little bit too, and I'm not here to tell you, well, this is facts. What I'm saying is this is things I experienced, right? So the problem with going too logical, it can really create a concrete barrier around your heart. And, that 2 feet drop we call from head to heart is is it gets harder if your heart is kind of calloused and all that. You've turned your heart into just your mind in a sense. Like, your heart does a lot of thinking regardless, but when you kind of cut off that thinking and communication to your brain, what happens is, the communication between those two get distorted, right? When you're only using one facet to it, what happens is, it's just like anything. A vehicle, if your radiator starts going, your thing overheats, and so on and so forth, right? It's all a working unit, and to just use one above the other it can really set you up for a non-responsive brain and heart, right? So I think the better thing is when we talk about emotional regulation, right? And that's the undersold, right? Where, the society kind of builds us up to, you got to think, you got to rise above your emotions and all that. And then the undersell is like, some people don't feel enough, right? I mean, some people feel too much and then others not enough, right? So finding that emotional regulation is the most key element to this, right? So you could oversell it and, everybody needs to feel, we all need to feel, or you could undersell it and say, don't feel anything. And I think I got those mixed matched earlier, so please forgive me. But, and that's for me, I got to find that happy medium, because if I'm sitting there and I'm allowing myself to get overindulged in all my emotional, and I start believing some of my emotions kind of rule the roost, then what I'm going to be doing is sitting from a very reactive standpoint instead of a balanced approach to be like, okay, because I know how important, now that I've stepped into this recovery game, like, I know how important my emotions are, but I know that they're not more important than my thoughts. They're equally as important, if that makes sense. And they're important in different ways. They're not always important in the same ways, right? There are times where I have to activate the heart brain rather than the brain, because sometimes it takes a little bit of more finesse to certain situations. Like, right, I wouldn't want to, so if my daughter's going through something, or somebody in your life is going through something, you really start having to communicate those two, right? Because if I just go up to somebody and use all the logic, right, and I hear their problems, and then I just start filtering out everything that they did wrong and how they can fix it by just doing this and that, right? Well, what it does is it doesn't really embody emotional intelligence, right? What you're doing is just giving them a whole lot of data points on what they can do better. And really, how people take that when they're in emotional states, to just think of how you just pretty much think they feel like you're saying that everything's wrong and what they're doing, right? And instead, that when you start connecting your heart to the situation, it takes on a different element, right? You can start listening more when your heart's involved, right? That means your mouth shuts up a little more, because your heart's more interested in hearing and connecting to their experience rather than just overshadowing with all kinds of data. But, right, and this is where that key balance comes in, is using your heart and your brain in almost a symbiotic type way. Because once you start listening to your heart and your mind, you can start transmuting some of those beautiful messages that equal healing, right? Because sometimes, I mean, when you start connecting those and somebody comes at you with their problems, you listen with your heart, and your heart's also listening to your brain, you can start giving some really good advice, right? And I like to take a position of experience, meaning that, I'm going to empathize and I'm going to try to put myself in their position. when I was going through something similar, and or if I haven't experienced that. And sometimes if I just don't have an experience in certain things, I can give them, okay, well, I'm not really versed in this, but I could always lend an ear, and I can tell you things that I've done to pull me out of situations that might be similar. Or sometimes if I just have no clue, I just shut my mouth and I'm just there for them. Because sometimes, how it could be taken is like there was a situation where somebody lost somebody, a really close or significant other years back, and I didn't have any experience with that, but I did have experience with loss and losing people. So I was able to approach it with just the limited knowledge I had, but not into the intense connection in which she lost, right? And so basically, what I'm saying is, although I didn't go through the same situation, I was able to put myself in a better standpoint based off my experience, while connecting my head and my heart together and being able to be there as best as I can, right? And sometimes it's not all about just answers or stuff like that, right? Sometimes somebody just needs somebody to cry to. Sometimes people just need an ear to listen. So, and that's what these emotion things are all about. When we're trying to step into our recovery, trying to find the path to emotional regulation. And I don't believe like the heart brain is much different than your brain as far as the communication patterns. I think they just have different processes of thinking, right? And I think it's important to combine both of those strengths together. And by meaning that they're the same, I don't mean the actual same. I just mean they have a special place in the process of connecting with other human beings and their struggles, right? Sorry if I got a little off in the weeds there, but the importance of, not overselling emotions and underselling is just trying to find that happy medium where you're not going bonkers. You're not, when I undersell all my emotional standpoint, it's like, I'm like too cut off. There's a concrete barrier around my heart, and and my aura goes a little bit less, and I stop connecting, and isolation gets a little bit more prevalent, right? But when I'm sitting in more into my heart, right, and I'm sitting only in my heart, I can be very reactive, and I can be very nobody gets it. Oh, poor me, right? And I've been on both of those ends where I close my heart, right, because I'm thinking too much with my logic side, and then I'm a bleeding heart if I'm thinking too much with my emotions. So I found that connecting your heart brain and your brain is the most effective tool that you can do with connecting to others, right? And the way we do that is there's different techniques. For me, which works best is getting to a place of meditation and prayer, body work, breath work, right? Yoga, meditation, breath work is the most important factor. You want to start connecting with your brain and your heart. Well, you start silencing things and start listening to the static within. Start being with the static be in, and start help to calm that. And you'd be surprised about the answers you get when you search within you, right? Not an answers. I'll put it this way. You want to go to your Google search inside your body rather than the Google search on your phone to find the things going on in you. And I think sometimes when you quiet your mind and you start doing breath work and you start doing body work, right? Whether it be yoga, actual exercise, you can put yourself in a better standpoint to start listening closer to your physical body, because it all tells a story and it's very important, right? I believe our emotional heart, like our brain heart is very excitable, right? And is listening on with all a whole bunch of stuff, meaning it's listening through the hurts, the happies, the excitements, the sadness. It's listening to all those social cues in life, and it can be very reactive a lot, right? Sometimes those feelings that pop up we cannot control. And that's where emotional regulations like really come into play. It's super important because there's plenty of times where stuff has happened and I'm super triggered and I've had to use my brain and my heart brain, and I'd have to connect those two. Okay, this is what I'm going through. Ooh. And then I use my heart brain to feel it and go, okay, this is interesting. And then I use my brain and say, hey, everything's going to be okay. This is a normal process. You're feeling this feeling. That was a little weird what that person said, or maybe that was a little triggering what I just heard. And I'm going to take a step back and take a couple breaths, and I'm going to give myself a chance to respond to the situation rather than react. Because if anything is a little off balance with that process, I can get a little jumpy and I can get real short. I just got told today that I was being short. I didn't think I was, but I took a step back and I'm like, sorry if I am. Like I didn't realize I was. I thought I was doing good today, right? But that's the important thing about being receptive to some of this stuff. This week has been hard. I have somebody close to us in the hospital. My little brother just ended up getting arrested again, and he's looking at some prison time, right? So life is showing up right before Christmas. So these are some, these are life showing up on life terms. So I chose emotion this week because it's bringing up a lot of stuff. It's bringing up a lot of stuff. So if you're out there and you're struggling with emotions around this time, and I think, especially right before Christmas, because tomorrow's Christmas Eve, and to you out there, guys, remember it is Christmas time, and to reach out and try to connect to your family. And if you're knowing someone struggle out there, please, Christmas time's a very hard time for some of these addicts out there. And if you're struggling with emotions and you're thinking dark thoughts, please reach out to somebody. There is a suicide hotline if you're getting real dark thoughts. Please just reach out, right? I think it's 988. I have to look it up. But correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But thank you, guys. I think that's all I got today. So Merry Christmas. I love you guys, and you guys have a blessed holiday. And I will look forward to chatting with you on here next week. Remember emotions, guys. Let's see if we can't find some emotional regulations, see what's kind of making us tick. And don't be afraid to feel, and don't be afraid to, if you have a bad time, just break down around people you trust and love, and you'll be surprised on the support you can get, right? Try to have a holly jolly Christmas, right? So our emotion is the intention for this week. I love you guys. This is F.D. Recovery. Peace. Thank you for tuning in to F.D. Recovery. A reminder, be kind to yourself on this journey of recovery. Also, call your sponsor. Get connected to local support groups. And for one day at a time, stay clean and sober.